According to the World Economic Forum, global inequality is going to worsen unless governments do more to ensure those most affected by rapid technological change aren't just cast aside and forgotten. Well, joining us now with more on this report, Saadia Zahidi, the World Economic Forum's Managing Director. Saadia, great to have you on the program to really get us started on this Monday, first day of Davos. When you look at all the reports that you put out, are governments taking on board the fact for social mobility? Is it retraining? What did you learn?
So what we try to look at is, clearly there is not just income inequality globally, but there is possibly the threat of rising income inequality. And I think we're starting to see that. That's being perceived around the world. In fact, we did a chief economist outlook a couple of weeks ago, and one of the biggest threats to global growth over the coming year is likely to be the economically motivated social protests that we're seeing. So what we try to find out is what are the pathways to social mobility? How do we actually get our economies going again in a way that provides people opportunity, and so we can start closing the income inequality gap. And we looked at 10 factors, and some of those are sort of standard stuff. Health, we need to ensure that people have better health care. Education, we need to ensure that people have better education. But what has become really critical in today's economy is, one, we need fairer wages. Yep. Two, we absolutely need social protection systems, given that there will be all of this technological disruption and, frankly, also disruption due to climate change and industry transitions. We also need lifelong learning mechanisms, and that is something that has become a non-negotiable in the current economy. We absolutely need that to change, because if not, it doesn't matter if we do the investments in primary, secondary, and university education. For the 3 billion people that are already part of the world's workforce, they need lifelong learning. And then finally, working conditions. Those have to change too.
So who's getting it right, or at least what are the governments or regions that are aware of this and trying to make a difference?
So number one in the rankings, we covered about 82 countries. For those were the ones for which we had good data. Denmark is number one. The United States is at 27. Countries like Brazil and India that have fairly high levels of income inequality, not surprisingly, are at the bottom when it comes to these factors of social mobility. So everyone will have to make a difference, but what's interesting is that it's not just developing economies that have this issue. It's a lot of large developed markets like the UK, like France to some extent, like the United States, that will also have to put a lot of changes in place.
Do you see more governments taking this on board, together with, I guess, the main risks to their economies? I know the World Economic Forum has focused a lot on climate change this year, but together with GDP, are they also looking at these kind of indices to make an impact? Also, because if you're a government and you don't do that, you may not get reelected.
I think this is going to be the decade in which governments will have to take this seriously, right? So there is the growth-related agenda, and we have to make sure that the economy is dynamic. The elevator keeps moving, because if not, we can't really lift boats for everyone. The second thing is, of course, the industry transition that needs to occur if we want to live in a greener economy, if we want to have more sustainability. The third aspect is technological change, and that's being woven across these other two areas. But none of this will really be possible if people don't have a sense of optimism, the sense that they will be able to give to their future generations a better life and better earning opportunities than they had themselves. And so this agenda around social mobility will be critical. Without it, we can't achieve those other objectives that we have.
But is it up to the governments, or is it up to private entities to do it?
So that was one of the most interesting parts of what we were looking at. Clearly, there's a lot of role for governments, but it's not just about increasing the spending on some of these aspects, it's about the mix of spending. So for example, if you look at France, it actually does fairly high levels of social spending, but when you look at the results, it's become very clear that it's not the right type of spending that needs to be done. And so there's probably a different mix of spending, a different type of quality that's required, more dynamic mechanisms, for example, for social safety or for lifelong learning. The second aspect of businesses, and we are making a big call for stakeholder capitalism here at Davos this year, and businesses will have to take into account social mobility, because they do have a big role to play. One, because of the services that they can be providing that add into the pathways of social mobility, whether that is education and training, whether that is healthcare, whether that is safety nets and security, social security. There is obviously a large role for businesses, for example, insurance companies, to play. So there's that aspect, but there's also what they can do with their employees, what they can do in their value chains, and what they can do in their communities. And that is going to be, in fact, a game changer for social mobility if businesses start taking this role seriously.
We're focusing a lot on emerging economies and emerging markets. Where do they stand in all of this?
So Brazil is at, I'm going to just take a look at the rankings, is at number 60. India is down at 76. South Africa is at 77. China is at 45. And so for most of these economies, if they want their growth trajectory to remain a positive one, they will have to tackle inequality.